For 3 months, Master Sergeant Elena Vasquez had endured the whispers, the eye rolls, and the barely concealed smirks from recruits half her age. At 45, she was the oldest trainee in the Elite Ranger Assessment Program, surrounded by soldiers who could have been her children. They called her Grandma when they thought she couldn't hear, questioned why someone her age was even attempting the most grueling military course in the country. But on the final day of assessment, when a young lieutenant colonel stepped forward during the impossible mountain exercise and spoke words that would silence every doubter in that valley forever, Elena didn't just prove her worth, she redefined what it meant to be a warrior. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The Colorado mountains stretched endlessly beyond the razor wire perimeter of Fort Carson's specialized training facility, their peaks cutting sharp silhouettes against the pre-dawn sky. Elena Vasquez stepped off the transport truck onto gravel that crunched beneath her boots like broken glass, each step sending a familiar ache through knees that had carried her through 2 decades of military service across 4 continents. The crisp mountain air bit at her exposed skin, but she welcomed the cold. It was honest, predictable, unlike the reception she knew waited inside those concrete buildings. She was 45 years old in a world designed for 20-somethings. With silver threading through hair that had once been jet black and laugh, lines mapping decades of experiences these young soldiers had never imagined. Her service record spoke of deployments to places that existed only in classified briefings, of missions accomplished when failure meant international incidents, of a career built on competence rather than compliance. But none of that mattered. Here, where youth was currency and age was liability. The other candidates clustered near the entrance, their conversations creating clouds of vapor in the frigid air. 26 of them, ranging in age from 19 to 32. Except for Elena. She stood apart not by choice, but by circumstance, watching them size each other up with the casual confidence of people who had never questioned whether they belonged. Their faces were unmarked by the kind of experience that taught you the difference between courage and recklessness, between confidence and arrogance. Staff Sergeant Marcus Chen, barely 24 but already decorated for valor in Syria, glanced in her direction with the mixture of curiosity and concern typically reserved for obvious mistakes. Sergeant First Class David Rodriguez, 31 and considered the old man of the group until Elena arrived, shook his head slowly as if witnessing something that violated natural law. The youngest among them, Private First Class Jessica Thompson, fresh from basic training with reflexes like a cat and ego to match, made no effort to hide her bewilderment at Elena's presence. The assessment coordinator emerged from the administration building carrying a clipboard thick enough to qualify as a weapon. Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Mitchell was career infantry, 41 years old herself, but bearing the kind of weathered authority that came from leading soldiers in places where leadership meant the difference between mission success and body bags. Her gray eyes swept the assembled group with professional assessment, cataloging strengths and weaknesses, identifying the ones who would excel and the ones who would wash out before week's end. When her gaze settled on Elena, something flickered across her expression, not disapproval exactly, but the look of someone trying to solve a puzzle with missing pieces. Elena maintained eye contact without challenge or deference, simply meeting authority with the steady confidence of someone who had earned the right to be there, regardless of what others thought about it. The briefing room smelled of fresh paint and industrial disinfectant, its walls decorated with photographs of previous assessment classes and motivational slogans that had worn thin from repetition. 27 folding chairs arranged in precise rows faced a podium where Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell began explaining what the next 8 weeks would demand of them. Sleep deprivation, physical exhaustion, mental stress tests designed to break down psychological barriers and rebuild them stronger. Failure rates hovering around 70%, with most washouts occurring within the first 2 weeks when reality collided with expectation. Elena listened with the practiced attention of someone who had survived similar briefings in different contexts, but she could feel the weight of 26 pairs of eyes stealing glances in her direction. The curiosity was palpable, mixed with skepticism that bordered on concern. She was an anomaly in their ordered world, a variable that didn't fit the established patterns they understood. During the break, conversations swirled around her without including her. Chun and Rodriguez debated the merits of different rucksack configurations while Thompson demonstrated stretching techniques to a cluster of equally young soldiers who hung on her every word like she was dispensing profound wisdom. Elena used the time to study her competition, reading body language and listening to conversations that revealed more about psychological makeup than any formal evaluation could capture. The dormitory assignment confirmed what she had expected. Bunk 47, positioned at the far end of the bay where she could observe without being observed, close enough to participate, but separate enough to maintain the distance that seemed to comfort everyone involved. She unpacked with military efficiency, each item finding its designated place in the limited storage space. Her movements economical and practiced while around her, the younger soldiers engaged in the social rituals of team building. Thompson claimed the bunk nearest the entrance, her gear spread across every available surface like she was marking territory. Chun organized his equipment with obsessive precision, every piece positioned according to some internal logic that made sense only to him. Rodriguez held court near the center of the bay, sharing war stories from deployments that sounded increasingly dramatic with each retelling. None of them approached Elena directly, but she caught fragments of conversations that made her position clear. The chow hall buzzed with nervous energy and forced camaraderie, trainees introducing themselves and establishing the social hierarchies that would define the next 8 weeks. Elena selected a table near the windows where she could eat in peace, while observing the group dynamics taking shape around her. Her tray was organized with the same precision she applied to everything else: protein, vegetables, carbohydrates arranged in neat sections, nothing wasted, everything consumed with purpose. 2 tables away, she overheard Thompson explaining to a captive audience why older soldiers struggled with modern military tactics. Too set in their ways, she declared with the absolute certainty of someone who had never been tested by genuine adversity. Can't adapt to new technology, can't keep up with the physical demands. Rodriguez nodded sagely, adding his own observations about age-related decline in reaction time and decision-making capacity under stress. Elena continued eating without visible reaction, but internally she cataloged their assumptions for future reference. Youth brought advantages: faster recovery, times fewer physical limitations, the resilience that came from believing yourself invincible. But it also brought blind spots that experience taught you to avoid, overconfidence that could prove fatal when reality failed to conform to expectation. The first week established patterns that would persist throughout the assessment. Elena arrived first for every formation, prepared for every evolution, ready for every challenge thrown at them. But her competence seemed to make the others more uncomfortable rather than less. She wasn't failing as they had expected, but neither was she struggling in ways they could understand or relate to. The physical training sessions became showcases for the generational divide. Thompson could complete pull-ups with gymnastic precision, her young muscles responding to demands with elastic efficiency. Chun moved through obstacle courses like flowing water, finding paths that older soldiers might not see or trust themselves to attempt. Rodriguez powered through endurance runs with the steady rhythm of someone whose body had not yet learned to betray him. Elena approached each challenge differently. Her pull-ups were fewer in number, but textbook in form, every repetition controlled and purposeful. She navigated obstacles with careful route selection, choosing paths that maximized efficiency over speed. Her runs were measured affairs, pace calculated to finish strong rather than start fast. She passed every test, met every standard, but her methods drew attention for their deliberation rather than their results. The younger soldiers began developing theories about her presence among them. Some suspected she was a plant, an evaluator, disguised as a participant to observe their behavior under stress. Others believed she was working through some midlife crisis, trying to recapture youth through physical challenge. A few wondered if she was being fast-tracked through assessment as part of some diversity initiative that prioritized politics over capability. None of them considered that she might simply be the most qualified person in the room. The weapons training revealed the first cracks in their assumptions. Elena's rifle work was surgical in its precision, each shot placed exactly where intended without wasted ammunition or dramatic flair. Her movements with small arms displayed the unconscious competence that came from years of practice in environments where mistakes carried permanent consequences. When the instructors demonstrated new techniques, she absorbed them immediately and integrated them seamlessly into existing skill sets that were already more advanced than most of the cadre possessed. Thompson, despite her natural athleticism, struggled with marksmanship fundamentals. Her eagerness to excel translated into rushed shots and poor follow-through. Chun's technical approach served him well in controlled conditions, but fell apart when stress was introduced. Rodriguez had decent fundamentals but lacked the mental discipline required for precision shooting under pressure. Elena said nothing about their struggles, offered no unsolicited advice, maintained the professional distance that had characterized her approach since arrival. But the instructors noticed the disparity, and their evaluations began reflecting a growing respect for capabilities that transcended age-based expectations. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The tactical exercises brought new challenges and new opportunities for the group to demonstrate their collective misunderstanding of Elena's presence. Small unit operations required teamwork, communication, and trust, commodities that were difficult to establish when one team member was viewed as a liability regardless of actual performance. Elena found herself assigned to supporting roles despite demonstrating superior tactical knowledge, relegated to positions that kept her out of primary leadership responsibilities. She accepted these assignments without complaint, understanding that competence alone was insufficient when social dynamics worked against integration. Instead, she focused on executing her assigned tasks flawlessly, while observing how the younger soldiers handled leadership pressure when given opportunities they may not have been ready for. The results were predictable. Thompson's natural charisma made her popular but ineffective as a tactical leader. Her decisions were based on instinct rather than analysis, and her communication style prioritized enthusiasm over clarity. Chun's methodical approach served him well in planning phases but paralyzed him when situations required rapid adaptation. Rodriguez possessed natural leadership instincts, but lacked the technical knowledge to translate good intentions into effective execution. Elena watched their struggles with professional interest rather than personal satisfaction. They were learning lessons that could only be taught through failure, developing capabilities that would serve them well if they survived long enough to apply them. Her role was not to accelerate their education, but to ensure her own performance remained above reproach regardless of how others chose to utilize her capabilities. The mountain warfare phase of assessment would prove to be the crucible where assumptions met reality with devastating clarity. The Colorado peaks showed no mercy to youth or experience, demanding everything from soldiers who thought they understood their own limitations. Elena had requested this assessment specifically because mountains were honest in ways that controlled training environments could never be. They revealed character, exposed weaknesses, and rewarded competence over confidence with mathematical precision. The base camp sat at 8,000 feet, already high enough to thin the air and challenge soldiers accustomed to sea-level operations. Elena felt the altitude in her lungs like everyone else, but 2 decades of experience in similar environments had taught her how to manage the discomfort without letting it compromise performance. She regulated her breathing, controlled her pace, and watched the younger soldiers struggle with the sudden introduction of a variable they had not anticipated. Thompson's athletic superiority meant nothing when every breath required conscious effort. Chun's methodical approach served him well, but his pace slowed noticeably as his body diverted energy to basic survival. Rodriguez maintained his usual bravado, but Elena noticed the subtle signs of someone pushing harder than sustainable shallow breathing. Tension in facial muscles, the slight tremor that indicated approaching exhaustion. The first night at altitude brought restless sleep and morning headaches that served as introduction to an environment that would only become more demanding. Elena rose before reveille, as was her habit, and spent the pre-dawn hours preparing gear and reviewing maps while the others recovered from their initial encounter with mountain warfare reality. Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell appeared beside her as she studied the topographical features they would encounter during the day's navigation exercise. The older woman moved quietly for someone of her rank, approaching without the ceremonial announcement that typically preceded interactions between senior officers and trainees. "Trouble sleeping?" she asked, settling onto the log where Elena had spread her maps. "Never sleep well the first night at altitude," Elena replied without looking up from her route planning. "Takes a few days for the body to adjust, regardless of fitness level." Mitchell nodded, recognizing the voice of experience rather than bravado. "You've done mountain operations before, Afghanistan mostly. Some training in the Rockies, few exercises in the Alps. Mountains don't care about your resume, but they reward preparation." The lieutenant colonel studied Elena's route selections, noting the careful balance between directness and safety margins. The way she had identified bailout options and alternate paths that spoke of someone who understood that mountain warfare was as much about risk management as physical capability. "The others seem to think you don't belong here," Mitchell observed. Elena looked up from her maps for the first time, meeting the lieutenant colonel's gaze with steady confidence. "The others are entitled to their opinions. I'm here to pass assessment, not win popularity contests." "Fair enough, but teamwork is a significant component of evaluation. Hard to demonstrate leadership if no one will follow." "Leadership isn't about getting people to follow you," Elena replied, returning to her route planning. "It's about making decisions that get everyone home alive, regardless of whether they understand why those decisions were necessary." Mitchell considered this perspective as the sun crested the peaks around them, painting the landscape in shades of gold and crimson that made the mountains look almost gentle in their beauty. She had been observing Elena for 3 weeks, watching someone whose performance consistently exceeded expectations, while social integration remained elusive. The disconnect troubled her because effective military leadership required both individual competence and team cohesion. The navigation exercise began at dawn with teams of 4 assigned randomly to prevent the formation of cliques that might compromise assessment validity. Elena found herself grouped with Thompson, Chun, and a quiet specialist named Marcus Williams, who had managed to avoid notice through competent mediocrity that kept him off both the high performer and washout lists. Thompson immediately assumed leadership of the group, despite having no more mountaineering experience than a weekend hiking trip she had taken during leave. Her confidence was infectious among her peers, but Elena recognized the dangerous combination of enthusiasm and ignorance that led to preventable accidents in unforgiving environments. The route Thompson selected looked efficient on paper. A direct line between checkpoints that minimized distance while maximizing difficulty. Elena studied the planned path and identified several points where the terrain would force them into exposed positions during weather windows that were already marginal. She suggested alternate routes that added distance, but provided better options for emergency evacuation if conditions deteriorated. Thompson dismissed her concerns with the casual wave of someone who had never seen weather kill people faster than enemy action. "We're not here to take the easy path, Grandma. We're here to prove we can handle whatever they throw at us." Chun supported Thompson's route selection, partly from genuine agreement and partly from the social dynamics that made disagreeing with youth more difficult than agreeing with experience. Williams remained silent, as was his habit, content to follow whatever direction the group established rather than contribute to decision-making processes that might expose him to criticism. Elena accepted the majority decision without further argument, understanding that some lessons could only be learned through direct experience. She adjusted her own preparations accordingly, packing additional emergency equipment and planning contingencies for scenarios that the others had not considered. If Thompson's leadership proved inadequate, Elena would be ready to assume responsibility for getting them home safely. The first checkpoint passed without incident, reached through a combination of Thompson's energy, Chun's navigation skills, and Elena's quiet corrections when their route selection proved less efficient than anticipated. The younger soldiers' confidence grew with success, and their pace increased as they began to believe their own optimism about mountain warfare being simply an extension of physical fitness. Elena maintained her steady rhythm, conserving energy for challenges that had not yet revealed themselves. She had seen this pattern before: early success leading to overconfidence, leading to poor decision-making when conditions changed without warning. Mountains were patient teachers, but their lessons often came with consequences that could not be undone. The weather began changing as they approached the second checkpoint, wind picking up from the west and clouds building along the peaks with the rapid development that characterized high-altitude weather systems. Elena checked her altimeter and noted the pressure drop that confirmed what her experience had already told her. They were heading into conditions that would test their preparation and judgment more severely than any physical challenge. Thompson maintained her aggressive pace despite the changing conditions, driven by competitive instincts that viewed adaptation as admission of weakness. Chun began showing signs of altitude-related stress, his normally methodical approach becoming increasingly erratic as oxygen deprivation affected cognitive function. Williams simply followed, trusting others to make decisions he was unwilling or unable to make himself. Elena monitored the deteriorating situation while maintaining her position within the team structure that Thompson had established. She was prepared to assume leadership if necessary, but professional protocol required giving the designated leader every opportunity to succeed before intervening. The decision would be made for her soon enough if current trends continued. The storm arrived with the sudden violence that made mountain weather legendary among those who had survived it. Visibility dropped to mere feet as wind-driven. Snow created whiteout conditions that transformed familiar terrain into alien landscape, where every step carried the potential for fatal mistakes. Temperature plummeted 20 degrees in as many minutes, turning perspiration into ice that threatened hypothermia for anyone not properly prepared. Thompson's confident leadership evaporated along with the visibility. The direct route she had selected became impassable in conditions where finding shelter took priority over reaching checkpoints according to predetermined schedules. Chun's navigation became unreliable as the storm interfered with GPS signals, and traditional landmark references disappeared into the swirling white void. Elena stepped forward without ceremony or discussion, her voice cutting through the wind with the authority of someone whose instructions were intended to prevent tragedy, rather than establish dominance. "We need shelter now. There's an emergency cache 200 meters southwest if we can find the marked boulder." Thompson started to object, her pride preventing immediate acceptance of leadership transfer, even when the situation demanded it. Elena ignored the protest and began moving in the direction of the cache, trusting that survival instincts would override social dynamics when the alternative became clear. Williams followed immediately, recognizing competence when his own life depended on it. Chun hesitated briefly before falling in behind Elena, his analytical mind processing the reality of their situation faster than his social conditioning could resist it. Thompson brought up the rear, her silence acknowledging what her words could not admit. Elena navigated through the storm using techniques learned in environments where mistakes meant death rather than training failures. She read the wind patterns, interpreted the subtle changes in terrain that remained visible even in whiteout conditions, and moved with the steady confidence of someone who had survived similar situations when backup was not available. The emergency cache appeared through the storm exactly where she had predicted, its orange marker barely visible against the white chaos surrounding them. The shelter inside was basic but adequate: emergency bivy sacks, chemical heating tablets, high-energy rations, and medical supplies sufficient to sustain a small group until conditions improved. Elena organized their shelter with the same systematic efficiency she applied to every task, assigning responsibilities based on capability rather than rank or social standing. Thompson found herself following instructions from someone she had dismissed as irrelevant, but the immediacy of their situation left no room for ego-driven resistance. The storm raged for 6 hours, long enough for the group to experience genuine fear and dependency on Elena's leadership. She managed their shelter, rationed their supplies, and maintained communication with base camp through emergency procedures that kept search and rescue teams informed of their status without requiring immediate extraction. When the weather finally cleared, revealing landscape transformed by fresh snow and brilliant sunshine, Thompson's first words were an apology that carried more weight than any formal recognition could have provided. Elena accepted it with the grace of someone who understood that respect earned through competence was worth more than respect demanded through authority. The remainder of the navigation exercise proceeded under Elena's leadership, with the younger soldiers deferring to her judgment in matters where experience trumped enthusiasm. They reached the final checkpoint ahead of schedule despite the weather delay, their performance noted by observers who had monitored the exercise through communication intercepts and satellite tracking. Back at base camp, word of Elena's performance during the storm spread through the cadre and trainees alike. The whispers that had once questioned her presence began shifting toward speculation about her background and experience. Thompson's public acknowledgement of Elena's leadership carried particular weight among the younger soldiers who had viewed her dismissal of age as validation of their own assumptions. Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell found Elena that evening, settling beside her as she maintained her equipment in the methodical routine that had become familiar to observers. "The after-action reports from today's exercise make interesting reading," she said. Elena continued working on her gear without pausing. "Interesting how? Seems like some of the team leaders learned valuable lessons about the difference between confidence and competence." Mitchell's tone carried approval that went beyond mere professional assessment. Elena looked up from her equipment maintenance, meeting the lieutenant colonel's gaze directly. "Everyone learned something today. The question is whether they'll remember it when the next storm hits." The conversation that followed would prove to be more significant than either woman realized at the time. Mitchell shared observations about Elena's performance that went beyond individual capability, noting her ability to assume leadership without undermining others, to provide instruction without condescension, and to manage crisis situations with calm competence that inspired confidence rather than dependency. Elena listened without false modesty or defensive explanations, understanding that she was being evaluated for purposes that extended beyond the current assessment program. Her responses were measured and honest, acknowledging both strengths and limitations with the realistic self-assessment that came from decades of honest feedback in unforgiving environments. The final weeks of assessment would test different aspects of military capability, but the mountain exercise had established Elena's position within the group in ways that transcended age-based assumptions. The younger soldiers began seeking her advice on technical matters, deferring to her judgment in tactical discussions, and including her in social interactions that had previously excluded her through oversight rather than intention. Thompson's transformation was the most dramatic, her casual confidence replaced by genuine respect for Elena's capabilities and experience. She began studying Elena's methods, asking questions about techniques and decision-making processes that revealed a hunger for knowledge that had been masked by youthful arrogance. Chun discovered that Elena's systematic approach complemented his own analytical tendencies, and their collaboration during planning sessions produced results that exceeded what either could accomplish individually. His respect for her competence opened doors to technical discussions that broadened both their perspectives. Rodriguez found himself reconsidering assumptions about age and capability that had seemed self-evident before witnessing Elena's performance under pressure. His war stories became less dramatic and more honest as he recognized the difference between experience and expertise. Even Williams emerged from his protective mediocrity, inspired by Elena's example, to contribute more actively to team discussions and decision-making processes. Her leadership style created space for different types of contribution without demanding conformity to a single model of military excellence. The final assessment exercise would test everything they had learned during 8 weeks of intensive training, but Elena had already accomplished something that transcended individual achievement. She had redefined the parameters of military excellence for a generation of soldiers who would carry those lessons forward into careers that would span decades of service in uncertain conditions. The culminating event was designed to be impossible, a scenario that demanded more than any individual could provide, requiring perfect teamwork, flawless execution, and the kind of leadership that emerged naturally from competence rather than designation. 27 soldiers entered the exercise. Only the best would emerge with the recognition they sought. Elena approached the final challenge with the same steady preparation that had characterized her performance throughout assessment. She was ready not just to succeed, but to demonstrate that excellence had no expiration date for those who chose to pursue it with honest dedication and professional commitment. The test that would silence every doubter was about to begin. The final assessment exercise began before dawn on a Tuesday. That would reshape every assumption the younger soldiers had carried about capability and age. Elena stood in the pre-mission briefing room alongside 26 other candidates, their faces illuminated by the harsh fluorescent lighting that made everyone look pale and uncertain. Outside, the Colorado mountains waited in darkness, their peaks invisible against a sky that promised weather complications before the day ended. Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell stepped to the podium with the measured pace of someone about to deliver information that would separate the capable from the merely confident. The exercise parameters were deceptively simple: rescue a downed pilot from hostile territory, extract critical intelligence, and return to base within 72 hours. What made it impossible was the terrain, the weather forecast, the simulated enemy forces, and the fact that success required perfect coordination between individuals who had spent 8 weeks learning to work together, despite fundamental differences in experience and perspective. Elena absorbed the briefing details with the systematic attention she applied to every military operation, mentally cataloging terrain features, weather windows, equipment limitations, and timeline constraints that would determine success or failure. Around her, the younger soldiers processed the same information through different filters: Thompson with aggressive optimism, Chun with analytical precision, Rodriguez with competitive enthusiasm, Williams with quiet apprehension that he tried to mask behind professional neutrality. The mission area encompassed 40 square miles of mountain wilderness, where visibility could drop to zero without warning, where altitude would sap strength and cloud judgment, where a single navigation error could turn rescue into tragedy. Elena had operated in similar terrain during missions that remained classified, but this exercise would test capabilities under stress conditions that exceeded anything these younger soldiers had previously experienced. Team assignments were announced with military efficiency that eliminated debate or negotiation. Elena found herself designated as second in command to Thompson, a decision that reflected the social dynamics that had emerged during assessment. Rather than optimal tactical organization, Thompson had earned leadership through popularity and physical performance, while Elena's competence had been acknowledged but not fully trusted by evaluators, who still questioned whether age was a liability that hadn't yet revealed itself. The irony was lost on no one except the decision-makers. Elena possessed more relevant experience than the rest of the team combined, but military hierarchies sometimes prioritize perception over capability when the stakes seemed manageable. The mountain wilderness would provide its own assessment of their organizational choices with mathematical precision that cared nothing for administrative convenience. Equipment distribution revealed the first signs of the challenges ahead. Each team member would carry specialized gear essential to mission success, but the total weight approached the limits of human endurance at altitude. Elena studied the load distribution and identified immediate problems. Thompson had assigned herself the lightest equipment, despite her role as team leader, while Chun carried technical gear that exceeded his physical capabilities. Elena suggested redistribution based on individual strengths and mission requirements, but Thompson dismissed the recommendation with the casual confidence of someone who had never experienced the consequences of poor planning in unforgiving environments. The younger woman's leadership style prioritized maintaining authority over optimizing performance, a distinction that would prove significant when physical demands exceeded theoretical capabilities. The insertion helicopter lifted off into darkness that swallowed the landscape beyond its navigation lights, carrying them toward a landing zone that existed only as coordinates on military maps. Elena checked her equipment one final time while studying the faces around her, reading tension and excitement in expressions that revealed how each team member processed stress and uncertainty. Thompson maintained her confident demeanor, but Elena noticed the subtle signs of someone trying harder than necessary to project authority. Excessive equipment checks, unnecessarily frequent communication with the pilot, the kind of micromanagement that indicated underlying anxiety about living up to leadership expectations. Chun focused on his technical equipment with obsessive attention to detail that served him well in controlled environments, but might prove paralyzing when rapid adaptation became necessary. His methodical approach was valuable for mission planning, but potentially dangerous when situations required immediate response to changing conditions. Rodriguez projected the easy confidence that had characterized his performance throughout assessment, but Elena recognized the difference between confidence based on competence and confidence based on optimism. His experience was real but limited, earned in environments where backup was available and mistakes were survivable. Williams remained quietly competent, following procedures with professional efficiency while avoiding any actions that might draw attention or criticism. His approach was sustainable but uninspiring, the kind of performance that met minimum standards without exceeding them. Elena prepared herself mentally for the leadership challenges ahead, understanding that her official position as second in command might become irrelevant if Thompson's inexperience created situations that required immediate intervention. She was ready to support, advise, or assume command as circumstances dictated, regardless of how others might interpret her actions. Landing zone appeared through the darkness as a small clearing, barely large enough for the helicopter to touch down safely. Elena felt the aircraft settle onto uneven ground, with the subtle shift that indicated marginal landing conditions, requiring quick exit to minimize exposure time for both crew and passengers. Thompson's first test of leadership came immediately. The pilot's voice crackled through their headsets with information about pickup times and emergency procedures, critical details that required immediate acknowledgement and dissemination to the team. Instead of processing and relaying the information efficiently, Thompson became flustered by the complexity and timeline pressure. Elena stepped in without ceremony, acknowledging the pilot's instructions and ensuring every team member understood their responsibilities and constraints. Her intervention was seamless and professional, but it established a pattern that would define their operation. Thompson would maintain nominal leadership while Elena provided the competence necessary for mission success. The helicopter departed into darkness, leaving them alone in mountains that stretched endlessly in every direction. The silence was profound after hours of engine noise, broken only by wind through pine trees and the distant call of nocturnal wildlife that reminded them they were visitors in an environment that operated according to rules they could not control or negotiate. Elena oriented herself using terrain features visible in starlight, comparing the landscape to the maps she had memorized during the briefing. The crash site lay 12 kilometers north through terrain that would challenge even experienced mountaineers under ideal conditions. With weather deteriorating and limited time before enemy forces would discover their presence, they needed to move immediately and efficiently. Thompson attempted to establish their route using GPS technology that worked perfectly in controlled environments, but proved unreliable in mountain terrain, where satellite signals were interrupted by peaks and valleys. Elena watched her struggle with technology that had become a crutch rather than a tool, understanding that navigation in this environment required traditional skills that couldn't be replaced by electronic devices. When Thompson's electronic navigation failed to provide reliable guidance, Elena produced a compass and topographical map that she had prepared as backup. Her route selection balanced speed with safety, identifying paths that provided concealment, while avoiding terrain features that could trap them if weather conditions deteriorated further. The younger soldiers watched Elena's old-school navigation techniques with the mixture of curiosity and skepticism that characterized their generation's relationship with pre-digital skills. Thompson reluctantly accepted Elena's route recommendations, while maintaining the fiction that she remained in control of strategic decision-making. They moved through darkness with Elena setting the pace and navigation standards, while Thompson provided leadership that consisted mainly of encouraging team members to maintain the performance standards that Elena had established. The arrangement was inefficient, but sustainable as long as conditions remained manageable. The first challenge came when they encountered terrain that hadn't appeared threatening on aerial photographs but proved nearly impassable in reality. A ravine blocked their planned route, requiring either a dangerous crossing in darkness or significant detour that would consume time they couldn't afford to lose. Thompson favored the direct approach, her competitive instincts viewing the detour as admission of weakness. Elena advocated for safety, understanding that a twisted ankle or broken leg would compromise the entire mission while satisfying one's ego. The debate revealed fundamental differences in risk assessment between youth and experience. Chun supported Elena's recommendation based on his analytical assessment of probability versus consequence. Rodriguez initially sided with Thompson but shifted his position when Elena explained the medical implications of injuries that couldn't be evacuated quickly. Williams remained neutral, as was his habit when decisions carried potential for criticism regardless of outcome. Elena's perspective ultimately prevailed, not through authority, but through logical presentation of facts that made the safe route appear obviously correct rather than overcautious. Thompson accepted the detour while maintaining the appearance of making the final decision, preserving her leadership status while implementing Elena's judgment. The detour added 2 hours to their timeline and required crossing exposed terrain. That increased their vulnerability to detection, but it prevented potential injuries that could have ended their mission before it properly began. Elena had traded efficiency for reliability, a calculation that would prove prescient when other challenges tested their margin for error. Dawn found them within sight of the crash site, a twisted wreck of metal and composite materials scattered across a meadow that offered no concealment from observation. The pilot was exactly where intelligence had predicted, alive but injured, equipped with critical information that justified the risks they were taking to reach him. Elena studied the site through binoculars, identifying approach routes, defensive positions, and escape paths that would be necessary if enemy forces arrived before they completed the extraction. The tactical problem was complex but solvable with proper planning and execution. Thompson's assessment was characteristically direct fast. Approach, quick extraction, immediate departure toward the pickup zone. Her plan was bold and simple, appealing to soldiers who preferred action over analysis. Elena recognized the attractions of simplicity, but also its limitations when complexity couldn't be wished away. Elena's alternative approach involved systematic reconnaissance, careful positioning, and coordinated movement that would take longer but provide better options if the situation developed complications. Her plan was methodical and conservative, designed to minimize risks that couldn't be eliminated entirely. The debate that followed revealed the persistent tension between youth and experience that had characterized their relationship throughout. Assessment. Thompson viewed Elena's caution as evidence of age-related timidity, while Elena saw Thompson's aggressiveness as inexperience masquerading as confidence. Chun's technical analysis supported Elena's approach, identifying vulnerabilities in Thompson's plan that could prove catastrophic if enemy forces appeared during extraction. Rodriguez found himself torn between instinctive support for aggressive action and growing respect for Elena's proven judgment. Williams waited for consensus rather than contributing to decision-making that might expose him to criticism. The resolution came when Elena proposed a compromise that incorporated elements of both approaches: rapid but careful approach, efficient but thorough extraction, and immediate but planned withdrawal. Her solution satisfied Thompson's need for decisive action while addressing the safety concerns that experience had taught Elena to prioritize. They moved toward the crash site, with Elena providing tactical guidance while Thompson maintained command authority. The arrangement had become comfortable through repetition, allowing both women to contribute their strengths without compromising mission effectiveness through personality conflicts. The pilot was conscious but disoriented, suffering from head trauma that made communication difficult, but not impossible. Elena assessed his medical condition with competence born from emergency medicine training that few people knew she possessed, determining that he could be moved safely but required careful handling to prevent additional injury. Thompson focused on intelligence extraction, questioning the pilot about enemy positions and capabilities, while Elena organized medical care and extraction preparations. Their division of responsibilities was logical and efficient, reflecting growing understanding of each other's capabilities and preferences. The critical intelligence was exactly what headquarters had expected: enemy force dispositions, communication frequencies, planned operations that would affect ongoing military activities throughout the region. Thompson recorded the information with digital equipment, while Elena prepared written backup that would survive electronic failure. Elena's medical assessment revealed injuries that were serious but not immediately life-threatening, assuming they could reach medical care within reasonable time. The pilot could walk with assistance but couldn't move quickly over difficult terrain, constraining their movement options and timeline for reaching the pickup zone. Thompson wanted to radio for emergency medical evacuation, bringing helicopter support directly to their location for immediate extraction. Elena opposed the plan because it would expose the aircraft to enemy action in an area that couldn't be secured with their limited personnel. The debate was interrupted by the sound of vehicles approaching through the valley below them, confirming intelligence reports about enemy patrol schedules while eliminating their margin for extended discussion. They needed to move immediately regardless of their preferred extraction method. Elena assumed tactical control without discussion or authorization. Her commands delivered with the authority of someone whose instructions were intended to preserve lives rather than establish dominance. Thompson found herself following orders from her subordinate, but the immediacy of their situation left no room for ego-driven resistance. They moved through terrain that challenged every aspect of their mountain warfare training, carrying an injured pilot whose condition complicated every decision about route selection and pace management. Elena navigated while providing medical care. Thompson maintained communication with headquarters. Shun managed technical equipment. Rodriguez provided security, and Williams assisted with patient care. The enemy patrol was systematic and professional, following search patterns that indicated they understood the tactical situation and were committed to preventing successful extraction. Elena monitored their movement through careful observation, while adjusting her team's route to maintain distance and concealment. Thompson's leadership during the movement phase consisted mainly of encouraging team members to maintain performance standards that Elena had established through tactical decision-making. The younger woman was learning to distinguish between commanding respect and earning it, but the lesson was occurring under stress conditions that left little room for gradual development. They reached a defensive position that offered temporary security while Elena reassessed their situation and options. The enemy patrol was closer than comfortable. The injured pilot was weakening from his injuries, and the weather was deteriorating according to patterns that Elena recognized from years of mountain operations. Thompson wanted to continue toward the original pickup zone despite the tactical complications, believing that aggressive movement would solve problems that careful planning could address more effectively. Elena advocated for alternative extraction sites that would reduce their exposure to enemy action while providing better medical support for their patient. The discussion was cut short by radio communication from headquarters, indicating that enemy forces were converging on their area in strength that exceeded original intelligence estimates. Their pickup window was closing rapidly, and any delay could result in being trapped in hostile territory without support. Elena's response was immediate and decisive. She identified an alternative landing zone that met aircraft requirements while providing defensive advantages, calculated movement times and distances that would get them there within their remaining window, and organized the team for rapid but careful movement across terrain that would test every skill they had developed. Thompson found herself implementing Elena's plan while maintaining the appearance of leadership that had become increasingly fictional as the mission progressed. Her role had evolved from commander to coordinator, facilitating Elena's tactical decisions rather than making them independently. The movement to the alternate landing zone required crossing exposed terrain during daylight hours while enemy forces actively searched for them. Elena planned their route to use natural concealment and timing that would minimize their visibility, while maintaining pace necessary to reach extraction on schedule. Shun's technical equipment proved invaluable for monitoring enemy communications and confirming their location relative to hostile forces. Rodriguez provided security that allowed the rest of the team to focus on movement and patient care. Williams demonstrated increasing competence as he gained confidence in his contributions to team performance. Elena managed the movement with systematic efficiency that balanced multiple competing requirements: speed versus security, direct routes versus concealed paths, patient care versus tactical necessity. Her decisions reflected experience gained in environments where mistakes had permanent consequences. Thompson's growing respect for Elena's capabilities was evident in her increasing deference to the older woman's judgment. The competitive relationship that had characterized their early interactions was evolving into collaborative partnership that maximized both their contributions to mission success. The alternate landing zone appeared through mountain mist, exactly where Elena had predicted. A small meadow that met minimum requirements for helicopter operations while providing defensive positions that could be secured with their limited personnel. Elena positioned the team to provide all-around security while maintaining clear communication with approaching aircraft. Thompson coordinated with the extraction helicopter, providing situation updates and landing guidance while Elena managed ground security and patient care. Their division of responsibilities had become natural rather than forced, reflecting genuine understanding of each other's strengths and limitations. The helicopter appeared through weather that was marginal for flying, its pilot demonstrating the kind of professional skill that made dangerous missions survivable. Elena guided the aircraft to a safe landing while Thompson organized the team for rapid but organized extraction that would leave nothing behind for enemy forces to exploit. The injured pilot was loaded aboard with medical care that Elena had provided throughout their movement, his condition stable enough for transport to definitive medical treatment. The intelligence he had provided was safely recorded in multiple formats that would survive any single point of failure. Elena was the last to board the aircraft, ensuring that all personnel and equipment were accounted for before allowing herself to be extracted from an area that enemy forces would occupy within minutes of their departure. Her final actions on the ground reflected the same systematic attention to detail that had characterized her performance throughout the mission. The helicopter departed into weather that was deteriorating rapidly, carrying them toward safety. That had been earned through competence, teamwork, and leadership that transcended age-based assumptions. Elena looked back at the mountains that had tested every aspect of their training and found herself satisfied with performance that met her own standards rather than exceeding others' expectations. Thompson sat beside her during the flight, no longer the confident young leader who had begun the mission with certainty about her own capabilities and skepticism about others. The experiences of the previous 72 hours had taught her lessons about leadership, competence, and respect that couldn't be learned in controlled training environments. Chun organized his technical equipment with the methodical precision that characterized his approach to every task, but his movements reflected new understanding of how individual capabilities contributed to team success. Rodriguez cleaned his weapon with the automatic efficiency of someone whose confidence was now based on proven performance, rather than theoretical capability. Williams demonstrated the quiet satisfaction of someone who had discovered that competence could be developed through dedication and proper instruction. His transformation from passive follower to active contributor reflected Elena's ability to inspire excellence in others through example rather than exhortation. Elena used the flight time to complete after-action analysis that would help her understand what had worked well and what could be improved in future operations. Her self-assessment was honest and thorough, acknowledging both successes and areas where better preparation or different decisions might have produced superior results. The landing at their home base marked the successful completion of an assessment exercise that had tested every aspect of their military training under conditions that approximated real-world operations. Elena emerged from the aircraft with the same measured composure that had characterized her performance throughout 8 weeks of evaluation, but something fundamental had changed in how others perceived her capabilities. Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell was waiting on the landing zone with other members of the assessment cadre, their expressions indicating that they had monitored the mission through communication intercepts and understood the complexity of what had been accomplished. Elena's performance had exceeded expectations that had already been revised upward multiple times during the assessment period. Thompson's first action after landing was to approach the lieutenant colonel with a request that reflected her new understanding of leadership and competence. She recommended Elena for official recognition that would acknowledge contributions that had transcended the formal command structure during their mission. Chun provided technical debriefing that emphasized Elena's tactical decision-making and its impact on mission success. Rodriguez offered combat assessment that credited Elena's experience with preventing casualties and ensuring extraction under conditions that could have resulted in mission failure. Williams spoke with quiet conviction about Elena's leadership style and its effect on team performance. His testimony carried particular weight because his previous reticence made his current enthusiasm more credible to evaluators who understood the difficulty of earning respect from reserved personalities. Elena provided her own debriefing with the professional objectivity that characterized her approach to every military task. She credited team members for their contributions while acknowledging areas where better preparation or different procedures might have improved their performance. Her assessment was balanced and constructive, focusing on lessons learned rather than individual recognition. The formal assessment results would be announced the following day, but Elena's performance during the final exercise had already answered every question about her capabilities and suitability for advanced military responsibilities. She had not only passed assessment, but redefined excellent standards for future participants who would follow in her footsteps. That evening, Elena found herself included in social activities that had previously excluded her through oversight rather than intention. Thompson sought her advice on career development and professional goals that reflected new understanding of what was possible for dedicated soldiers, regardless of age. Chun engaged her in technical discussions that explored advanced concepts beyond the scope of their current training. Rodriguez shared experiences from his deployments, with genuine interest in learning from someone whose background exceeded his own. Williams emerged from his protective shell to participate in conversations that he had previously observed from the margins. Elena responded to their attention with the same professional courtesy that had characterized her interactions throughout assessment, but she recognized the significance of their changed attitudes toward age and capability. Her performance had challenged assumptions that extended beyond individual prejudice to institutional biases that affected how military organizations developed and utilized human resources. The conversation that evening ranged across topics that revealed how much each team member had learned during their weeks together. Thompson had discovered that leadership was about enabling others rather than dominating them. Chun had learned that technical competence was meaningless without practical application under stress. Rodriguez had recognized that confidence required constant validation through performance rather than reputation. Williams had found his voice and his value as a contributing member of a high-performance team. Elena had demonstrated that experience and competence could transcend age-based limitations when applied with professional dedication and personal integrity. The lessons learned during assessment would influence their careers for decades to come, shaping how they approached leadership, teamwork, and professional development in environments where lives depended on making correct decisions under pressure. Elena's example had provided a template for excellence that incorporated both individual capability and collective achievement. As the evening progressed and conversations turned toward future assignments and career goals, Elena reflected on her own motivations for attempting assessment at an age when most soldiers were planning retirement. She had not been trying to prove anything to skeptics or challenge institutional assumptions about age and capability. She had simply wanted to test herself against standards that represented the highest levels of military excellence, to measure her capabilities against benchmarks that were absolute rather than relative. The opinions of others had been irrelevant to her personal goals, but their changed attitudes were satisfying evidence that competence could transcend prejudice when given opportunity to demonstrate itself. The final day of assessment would bring official recognition and new assignments that reflected demonstrated capabilities rather than preconceived limitations. Elena approached that conclusion with the same steady preparation that had characterized her performance throughout the evaluation period, ready for whatever challenges and opportunities lay ahead. The assessment ceremony took place in the main auditorium at Fort Carson, its walls lined with portraits of distinguished graduates whose careers had shaped military doctrine for generations. Elena stood among the 27 candidates who had begun the program 8 weeks earlier, but the woman who waited for final evaluation bore little resemblance to the isolated figure who had endured whispers and skeptical glances on that first morning. Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell approached the podium with the measured pace of someone about to deliver judgments that would influence careers and shape futures. The assembled candidates represented the culmination of selection processes that had eliminated hundreds of applicants before they ever reached the starting line, but only a fraction would receive the recognition they sought. The criteria for success had never been clearly defined because excellence in military operations couldn't be reduced to simple metrics or standardized tests. Leadership emerged through action rather than designation. Competence revealed itself under pressure rather than in controlled environments, and character manifested itself when stakes were high enough to matter. Elena listened to the preliminary remarks with professional attention while observing the nervous energy that surrounded her fellow candidates. Thompson sat straighter than usual, her earlier confidence tempered by newfound understanding of what leadership actually required. Chun maintained his analytical composure, but his hands moved restlessly as he processed the significance of what was about to unfold. Rodriguez projected calm assurance that now reflected genuine capability rather than optimistic assumptions. Williams had emerged from his protective anonymity to display quiet confidence that came from proven contribution rather than hoped for recognition. Around them, other candidates demonstrated varying degrees of tension as they awaited verdicts that would validate or challenge their self-perceptions. The first announcement concerned candidates who had demonstrated competence but not excellence, soldiers whose performance met standards without exceeding them. These individuals would return to their units with enhanced skills and valuable experience, but without the formal recognition that marked exceptional achievement. Williams heard his name called in this category, and his reaction revealed how much he had changed during the assessment period. Instead of relief at avoiding failure, he displayed genuine disappointment at missing the highest level of recognition. Elena caught his eye and nodded with approval that acknowledged his transformation from passive follower to active contributor. The second category included candidates who had excelled in specific areas while falling short of comprehensive excellence. Chun's name appeared on this list, his technical competence and analytical skills recognized while acknowledging limitations in other aspects of military leadership that couldn't be addressed through training alone. Rodriguez received similar recognition, his natural leadership abilities and combat instincts noted alongside areas where inexperience had prevented optimal performance. Both men accepted their designations with professional grace while privately processing lessons learned about the difference between potential and achievement. Thompson's name was called in the third category, reserved for candidates who had demonstrated significant leadership capability while revealing areas requiring additional development. The announcement acknowledged her natural charisma and physical competence while noting that effective leadership required wisdom that could only be gained through experience and reflection. Her reaction surprised everyone who had observed her competitive drive throughout the assessment period. Instead of disappointment at falling short of the highest recognition, Thompson displayed genuine satisfaction with accurate assessment of her current capabilities and clear guidance for future development. Elena remained standing as the categories were announced, her name conspicuously absent from lists that included every other candidate. The significance of this omission was not lost on anyone present, but its meaning remained unclear until Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell reached the final portion of her remarks. The highest level of recognition was reserved for candidates who had demonstrated not just individual excellence, but the ability to elevate others through their leadership and example. This category traditionally remained empty or included at most one individual whose performance had transcended normal expectations. Elena's name was called as the sole recipient of this recognition, but the announcement was accompanied by something unprecedented in the program's history. Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell requested that Elena join her at the podium to address the assembled candidates and cadre about leadership and professional development. The invitation reflected institutional recognition that Elena's contributions during assessment had extended beyond individual achievement to influence how the program itself would evaluate and develop future military leaders. Her performance had challenged assumptions about age and capability, while demonstrating excellence that transcended demographic categories. Elena approached the podium with the same measured composure that had characterized her behavior throughout the assessment period. She faced an audience that included fellow candidates who had learned to respect her capabilities, cadre members who had revised their understanding of human potential, and senior officers who were reconsidering how military organizations could better utilize experience and wisdom. Her remarks were brief and focused, reflecting the practical approach that had earned respect from soldiers who valued substance over rhetoric. She spoke about the relationship between individual capability and team performance, emphasizing that excellence was not a competition, but a standard that could be achieved by anyone willing to commit themselves to continuous improvement. Elena acknowledged the contributions of her fellow candidates, noting how their diverse strengths had enhanced everyone's performance when properly coordinated and utilized. She credited Thompson's energy, Chun's analytical skills, Rodriguez's instincts, and Williams's steady reliability as examples of how different types of excellence could complement each other in effective teams. Her comments about age were limited, but significant, noting that experience was simply another tool that could contribute to mission success when properly applied. She emphasized that wisdom came from learning rather than aging, and that young soldiers who approached their development with dedication and humility could acquire in years what others might take decades to achieve. The response to her remarks was immediate and sustained, with applause that reflected genuine respect rather than polite acknowledgement. Thompson led the ovation with enthusiasm that demonstrated how completely her attitude toward Elena had changed during their weeks together. Following the ceremony, Elena found herself surrounded by fellow candidates seeking advice about career development and professional goals. Their questions revealed how her example had influenced their understanding of what was possible for soldiers who approached their service with proper dedication and perspective. Thompson requested assignment to Elena's first duty station, recognizing an opportunity to continue learning from someone whose capabilities she had initially dismissed. Chun sought guidance about advanced technical training that would complement his analytical strengths with practical application skills that Elena had demonstrated. Rodriguez asked about deployment opportunities that would provide the kind of experience necessary for developing judgment under pressure. Williams inquired about leadership development programs that would help him build confidence in decision-making situations that he had previously avoided. Elena responded to their interest with professional courtesy while maintaining appropriate boundaries between mentorship and friendship. She provided practical advice about career planning while emphasizing that each soldier needed to develop their own approach to excellence based on individual strengths and circumstances. The conversation revealed how Elena's influence had extended beyond immediate team members to affect other candidates who had observed her performance throughout the assessment period. Soldiers who had never interacted with her directly sought opportunities to learn from her example and apply her methods to their own professional development. Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell approached the group with information about Elena's next assignment, a position that reflected institutional recognition of capabilities that extended beyond traditional role definitions. Elena would be joining the assessment cadre as senior instructor, responsible for developing training programs that would prepare future candidates for the challenges she had just mastered. The assignment represented unprecedented recognition for someone who had completed assessment rather than gradually working up through instructor positions over multiple years. Elena's appointment reflected confidence that her experience and demonstrated Competence qualified her to shape training programs that would influence military leadership development for years to come. Thompson's reaction to the announcement was immediate and enthusiastic, requesting assignment as Elena's assistant instructor if such positions were available. Her request reflected complete transformation from competitive rival to dedicated student, recognizing an opportunity to continue learning from someone whose capabilities she had learned to respect. Chun and Rodriguez expressed similar interest in remaining connected to Elena's professional development, understanding that her influence on their own growth had been significant enough to justify adjusting their career plans to maintain access to her guidance and example. Elena accepted the instructor assignment with the same professional grace that had characterized her approach to every challenge during assessment. She understood that the position would allow her to influence military training programs while continuing her own professional development in new areas that would expand her capabilities. The transition from candidate to instructor occurred with remarkable speed, reflecting institutional urgency about implementing lessons learned from Elena's performance during assessment. Her first assignment involved reviewing existing training protocols and identifying areas where age bias might be preventing optimal utilization of experienced personnel. Elena approached this task with systematic thoroughness that had become her trademark, analyzing training data and interviewing both instructors and candidates about their experiences with age-related assumptions. Her findings revealed patterns of institutional bias that were subtle but significant in their impact on personnel development and utilization. The report she produced documented specific instances where age-based assumptions had led to suboptimal training outcomes and missed opportunities for utilizing experience and wisdom that could enhance program effectiveness. Her recommendations focused on practical changes that would improve assessment accuracy while maintaining high standards for performance and capability. Implementation of Elena's recommendations began immediately, with changes to evaluation criteria that emphasized demonstrated competence over demographic characteristics. The modifications were subtle but significant, designed to ensure that capability rather than preconception determined advancement opportunities. Elena's first class of instructor candidates included Thompson, who had requested reassignment to pursue advanced leadership training under Elena's guidance. The younger woman's transformation from skeptical competitor to dedicated student represented the kind of institutional change that Elena's example had inspired. The training program Elena developed reflected her understanding that excellence could be achieved through different paths, and that effective leadership required wisdom that transcended age boundaries. Her approach emphasized practical application over theoretical knowledge, real-world problem-solving over academic exercise. Thompson excelled in the instructor program, her natural leadership abilities enhanced by Elena's guidance about the relationship between authority and competence. The younger woman's development demonstrated how mentorship could accelerate professional growth when both parties approached the relationship with appropriate respect and dedication. Other instructor candidates included soldiers from various backgrounds and experience levels, creating a diverse learning environment that reflected Elena's belief that excellence could emerge from unexpected sources when properly nurtured and developed. Elena's reputation as an instructor grew rapidly throughout the military training community, with other programs requesting her consultation on curriculum development and assessment methodology. Her influence extended beyond the immediate program to affect how military organizations approached professional development and leadership training. The success of her instructor program led to additional responsibilities, including development of advanced training curricula for senior military leaders who needed to adapt to changing operational environments and personnel demographics. Elena's approach emphasized practical wisdom over theoretical frameworks, focusing on real-world application of leadership principles. Her work attracted attention from senior military leaders who recognized that Elena's insights about age, experience, And capability had broader implications for personnel management and organizational effectiveness. She was invited to participate in policy discussions about military career development and leadership preparation. Elena's contributions to these discussions reflected her practical approach to complex problems, emphasizing evidence-based solutions over ideological positions. Her recommendations focused on creating opportunities for excellence to emerge regardless of demographic characteristics while maintaining rigorous standards for performance and capability. The institutional changes that resulted from Elena's influence were gradual but significant, affecting how military organizations recruited, trained, and promoted personnel. Her example had demonstrated that excellence transcended age boundaries. When supported by appropriate institutional structures and evaluation methods, Thompson completed her instructor training with distinction, earning assignment as Elena's primary assistant in developing advanced curriculum for senior leader development. Their professional relationship had evolved into genuine partnership, based on mutual respect and complementary capabilities. The success of Elena's programs attracted international attention, with allied military organizations requesting consultation about training methodology and leadership development. Her influence extended beyond national boundaries to affect how professional military organizations approached human resource development. Elena approached these expanded responsibilities with the same systematic dedication that had characterized her performance since arriving at assessment 8 months earlier. She understood that her individual success had created opportunities to influence institutional practices that would affect thousands of military professionals over coming decades. The recognition she received reflected not just personal achievement, but validation of principles that transcended individual circumstances. Elena had demonstrated that competence could overcome prejudice, that experience was valuable regardless of when it was acquired, and that excellence was available to anyone willing to pursue it with appropriate dedication and humility. Her story became part of military training folklore, referenced in leadership courses and professional development programs as an example of how assumptions about age and capability could limit institutional effectiveness. Elena's example inspired changes that would influence military personnel practices for generations to come. The final recognition of Elena's contributions came in the form of promotion to positions that had previously been reserved for officers with traditional career progression patterns. Her advancement reflected institutional acknowledgement that competence and leadership capability were more important than conventional career timelines. Elena accepted these honors with characteristic grace, while maintaining focus on the practical work of developing training programs and mentoring junior personnel. Her success had opened doors that would remain open for others who possessed similar capabilities regardless of their age or background. The lasting impact of Elena's achievement extended far beyond individual recognition to influence how military organizations understood and utilized human potential. Her example had demonstrated that excellence was available to anyone willing to pursue it with proper dedication, regardless of whether others initially recognized their capabilities. Thompson and other soldiers who had been influenced by Elena's example carried those lessons forward into their own careers, creating ripple effects that would influence military leadership development for decades. Elena's legacy was not just her own achievement, but the achievements of those she had inspired and influenced. The transformation was complete but ongoing, as Elena continued developing training programs and mentoring personnel who would face their own challenges and opportunities. Her work had created lasting institutional changes that would benefit military organizations and the soldiers they served long after her own career concluded. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.